It was a cold autumn evening in 1925, and the streets of Harlem were quieter than usual, the distant hum of the city softened by the threat of rain. Bumpy Johnson, known as the King of Harlem's streets, stood at the threshold of his safe house, his mind racing faster than his feet. Word had spread, the law was coming for him, and this time, it wasn't just the local beat cops. It was the full weight of the police, the feds, and the biggest bounty on his head Harlem had ever seen. They had cornered him before, but this time was different. They had intel, informants, and a whole system gunning for him. They weren't going to let him slip through their fingers again. He turned to his most trusted ally, Big Jim, his eyes steely with determination. They think they've got me. They're wrong. Big Jim nodded, his massive form blocking the doorway as he scanned the street. It's bad, Bumpy. We got maybe an hour, 2 at best. You need to move fast. Bumpy didn't blink. He was the kind of man who made a plan and stuck to it. In his world, you couldn't afford to let fear dictate your next move. Every decision counted. And as he stood there in the shadow of the law, he knew the stakes had never been higher. They won't catch me, Jim, Bumpy muttered under his breath. Not tonight. Without another word, he stepped into the shadows, disappearing into the maze of alleyways that only he knew, like the back of his hand. This wasn't just about escaping the law, this was a battle for his very survival. If Bumpy Johnson was going down, it wasn't going to be on anyone's terms but his own. Bumpy Johnson was not just a man, he was a legend in the making. Born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1905, he had risen from the streets of Harlem, carving out his own empire in the most unforgiving of environments. By 1925, he had ascended to the top of Harlem's criminal world, his name synonymous with power, respect, and fear. But Bumpy's rise wasn't just about the money or the territory. It was about survival. Harlem was a battleground, a place where only the strongest could hold sway. Bumpy had learned that quickly. He knew the streets better than anyone, and every decision he made had consequences. He didn't just deal in drugs, alcohol, and gambling. He dealt in power. He commanded loyalty through respect, not fear. And it was that very power that had made him a target. At this point in his life, Bumpy was more than a crime boss. He was the protector of Harlem. The people who lived on these streets trusted him more than anyone else. When the corrupt police force, politicians, or outside criminal organizations tried to push them down, Bumpy stood in their way. He didn't just rule Harlem, he owned it, and no one was going to take it from him. But this time, Bumpy was facing something he had never faced before: the full force of the law. The authorities had finally put everything in place to capture him. It wasn't just another raid, it was a manhunt, and they weren't going to stop until they had him behind bars. The law had tried to corner Bumpy before, and each time he had slipped through their grasp. But the walls were closing in, and for the first time, he felt like the noose was tightening. This escape wouldn't just be about slipping away unnoticed. It would be about outwitting the most dangerous people in the city, all while protecting the kingdom he had fought so hard to build. The night was closing in, and Bumpy could feel the weight of his decisions. He wasn't just running from the law, he was running from the consequences of his choices. For years, He had controlled Harlem with an iron fist, and while he had earned the respect of the people, he had made plenty of enemies along the way. The police, the politicians, and even rival gangs had all tried to dethrone him. But Bumpy had always managed to stay one step ahead. This time, however, was different. The authorities had been closing in on him for months, but it wasn't just the usual bribes or informants. They had real evidence this time. Bumpy had kept his operations tight, but as the pressure mounted, leaks started to appear. A few too many trusted faces had started to disappear, and whispers of betrayal filled the air. Bumpy had always trusted his instincts, but even he knew that this was the biggest challenge of his life. The police had finally pulled together enough evidence to take him down. They had enough to charge him for nearly every illegal activity in Harlem, from the bootlegging operations to the extortion rackets. The raid they planned was more than just an attempt to arrest him. It was a statement. If they caught him, it would send a message that no one, no matter how powerful, was untouchable. But Bumpy wasn't about to let that happen. He knew the city better than anyone. The alleys, the hidden rooms, the back doors that led to freedom. He had made a life out of outwitting the law, and now he was going to do it again. But even Bumpy couldn't escape alone. His men had been loyal to him for years, but now he needed to protect them too. He couldn't afford to let anyone get caught up in his mess. He had to move fast, and he had to make sure the people who depended on him didn't end up behind bars with him. The clock was ticking. Bumpy's men had already gone to work, setting up diversion points, clearing out safe houses, and creating a maze of misdirection. But it wasn't enough to just create chaos. He needed to make the authorities believe they had him cornered, then slip out when they least expected it. This wasn't just about getting away. This was about staying in control. The law had underestimated him before, and now it was time to make them pay. They wanted Bumpy? They'd have to catch him first. Bumpy moved with a calm urgency, his mind racing through every possible escape route. He had faced worse, many times before, but the stakes had never been this high. If he slipped up, it wouldn't just be his life at risk, it would be the entire community's. Harlem depended on him. As he made his way through the back alleys of Harlem, the streets seemed different tonight. Darker, quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The usual sounds of music, chatter, and movement were replaced with a tense silence. The familiar streets now seemed foreign, threatening. The city had grown used to Bumpy's dominance, but tonight it felt like everything was on the line. Big Jim was already a few steps ahead, coordinating with Bumpy's trusted men, ensuring that everyone was where they needed to be. The plan was simple. Create a distraction that would draw the law's attention away from Bumpy, give him the chance to slip away unnoticed, and then fade into the shadows. Bumpy's men had set up false leads, making it appear as though he was still in his safe house. A few blocks down, a fire had been set, drawing the attention of the police and creating chaos that would buy Bumpy the time he needed to make his escape. But the most dangerous part of this plan was yet to come. Bumpy had to outsmart the best the police had to offer, and they were relentless. For weeks, they'd been closing in, gathering information, setting up surveillance, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. This wasn't just a matter of slipping away unnoticed. It was about leading them down a trail of misdirection so convincing that even the most seasoned officers would believe they'd caught their prey. Bumpy's eyes scanned the darkened streets, his senses heightened. He wasn't just running from the law, he was making them chase a ghost. He had always been a step ahead, and tonight would be no different. As he rounded a corner, Bumpy spotted a familiar face. One of his men, Johnny, leaning against a lamppost, looking around nervously. "Everything set, Bumpy?" Johnny whispered as he approached. "They've got patrols blocking the usual routes, but we've got one shot at this. There's a tunnel under the old warehouse, should lead us out past the docks." Bumpy nodded, his face serious. He didn't like the idea of using the tunnel. It was risky, and there was always a chance that someone had gotten there first. But time was running out. The feds had to be closing in on his location, and any minute now, they would sweep through the streets, setting up roadblocks, trapping him in a net. "Get to the others. We'll take the tunnel. Stay low and stay sharp," Bumpy ordered. Johnny gave a quick nod before disappearing into the shadows. Bumpy turned back, his hand tightening around the grip of his revolver. He didn't want to shoot unless he had to, but tonight, every option was on the table. He knew the cops weren't just going to let him walk away. They would give chase, and they would do whatever it took to catch him. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as Bumpy's footsteps quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, and his stomach tightened. They were close. As Bumpy neared the alley that would lead him to the tunnel, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking his path. His eyes narrowed instinctively. It was one of his men, but something about the way he stood made Bumpy pause. The man's face was tense, his eyes darting around nervously. "What's wrong, Frank?" Bumpy asked, his voice low and steady. Frank looked around again, swallowing hard before speaking. "They're onto us, Bumpy. A snitch. Someone's been talking. They've set up a barricade down by the docks. They're waiting for you." Bumpy's blood ran cold. The worst thing that could happen had just come true. A traitor in the ranks. Someone had betrayed him, tipped off the law. The one thing Bumpy had always feared was someone betraying the trust he had built. It had always been his strength, and now it was his weakness. "Who?" Bumpy's voice was icy, his gaze never leaving Frank's face. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "I don't know," Frank stammered. "I've been trying to keep things tight, but someone slipped. They knew we were coming this way. They set up a block, Bumpy. You can't go that way." Bumpy clenched his jaw. He had trusted his men to have his back, and now one of them had sold him out. But there was no time for anger. He had to think. He had to act fast. His mind raced through every option, every escape route. Without warning, Bumpy grabbed Frank by the collar, his grip tight. "You've got one chance, Frank. You tell me who's behind this, and I'll give you a chance to walk away clean. If you don't, then you can go down with the rest of the rats." Frank's eyes widened with fear, and for a moment it seemed like he might crack. But before he could speak, Bumpy's keen sense of hearing picked up a distant sound. The unmistakable screech of tires, the flash of headlights cutting through the darkness. The cops were closer than he thought. "Get out of here," Bumpy snapped, pushing Frank away. "Go warn the others. I'll handle this." Frank hesitated for a moment, then turned and ran. Bumpy didn't wait. He spun on his heel, sprinting toward the tunnel entrance, just as the first of the police sirens got louder. The streets had become a battleground, and Bumpy had to outwit them, just as he had done countless times before. He wouldn't let a traitor and a few cops ruin everything he had worked for. Bumpy reached the entrance of the tunnel, his lungs burning from the exertion. As he descended into the darkness, he heard the faint sound of boots hitting the pavement behind him. The law was closing in. He was running out of time, but he could feel the pulse of the city beneath his feet, the streets, the alleys, the secret paths only he knew. There was no turning back now. Tonight would either be the night he outwitted the law, or the night they finally caught him. The tunnel was damp and narrow, the walls covered in grime from years of neglect. Bumpy's footsteps echoed off the stone as he moved swiftly through the darkness. He could feel the weight of the moment, the sound of distant sirens growing louder with each passing second. There was no room for error. He had outsmarted the law before, but this time they were closing in on him faster than he'd anticipated. His breath was steady, his mind focused. He had to move quickly, but he also had to think. The law was ruthless. They wouldn't stop until they had him in custody. He needed to find a way to throw them off his scent, to disappear completely into the night. The tunnel was just the first step. He had to make sure the exit on the other side wasn't compromised. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from behind him, followed by a voice, a familiar voice. "Bumpy!" The voice called out, raspy with fear. Bumpy stopped dead in his tracks, every muscle in his body tensing. It was Frank, the same man who had betrayed him earlier. He was out of breath, his face pale and wide-eyed. Bumpy's eyes narrowed as he turned to face him. Frank had caught up, and from the way he was panting, Bumpy could tell something was wrong. He didn't have much time. "Get out of here, Frank. You shouldn't be here," Bumpy snapped, trying to hide the growing sense of unease creeping up his spine. But Frank shook his head frantically, his eyes darting around. "Bumpy, they're coming. More of them. They know the tunnel. They've got it blocked off. We're trapped." The air around them seemed to grow heavier, the reality of the situation setting in. The feds had planned this well. They knew the layout of the city better than most, and they knew where to put the pressure on Bumpy. The trap had been set, and now it was closing. Bumpy's mind worked quickly. He couldn't afford to panic. "How many?" he asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the tension that simmered within him. "Too many," Frank replied. "They're on both ends of the tunnel. I didn't know what to do. I thought I could make it back to you. Warn you." Bumpy let out a low, frustrated sigh. Frank had betrayed him once, and now he was running back for redemption. Bumpy was no fool. He knew when a man was truly loyal and when he was just trying to save his own skin. But there was no time for judgment now. They both needed to get out. "All right, follow me," Bumpy ordered, turning and continuing down the tunnel at a quicker pace. "And don't make any noise. If we're going to get out of here, we move like shadows." Frank hesitated, but followed quickly, his footsteps quickening to match Bumpy's. The tension was unbearable, the sound of their footfalls mingling with the ever-present hum of the law closing in. Bumpy's mind was already racing ahead, analyzing every possible escape. The city of New York was a maze, and Bumpy had always been the one to find his way through it. As they neared the end of the tunnel, Bumpy slowed, his senses heightened. He didn't trust Frank's warnings entirely.
Frank had once sold him out,
And now the situation was too dire to trust anyone fully. He reached for his revolver, sliding it from the holster, and motioned for Frank to follow suit. They reached the opening, and Bumpy peered out carefully, scanning the street beyond. He could see the faint glow of city lights, but more importantly, he could hear the shuffle of boots, the unmistakable sound of men in uniform closing in. The feds were waiting. They had anticipated his every move. In that moment, Bumpy made a decision. He wasn't going down without a fight. The door ahead of them wasn't just a route to freedom. It was their last chance. If they were going to make it, they needed a diversion. Without saying a word, Bumpy turned and gestured for Frank to follow him into an adjacent alleyway. He knew where he was going. The alley led to an old butcher shop that he had used before. There was a back door, one that led to another part of the city. The shop owner had been a loyal ally, always willing to help when Bumpy needed to disappear for a while. They made their way through the alley at a hurried pace. Bumpy's mind raced. There was no time to waste, no time for mistakes. He couldn't afford to be cornered, not again. The shop was only a few blocks away, but with each step, the pressure mounted. He could feel the law closing in from behind. One wrong move, one false step, and the game would be over. As they reached the back door of the butcher shop, Bumpy paused. He motioned for Frank to stop and listen. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the alley, too close for comfort. The law was on them. "Get ready," Bumpy whispered, his voice sharp. "We're not out of this yet." With a swift motion, Bumpy kicked open the door to the shop, stepping inside with Frank right behind him. The smell of meat and salt lingered in the air, but Bumpy's mind was elsewhere. He knew they were running out of time. The shop owner, an older man with graying hair and a thick accent, looked up as they entered. He immediately saw the urgency in Bumpy's eyes and wordlessly stepped aside, leading them to the back of the shop, where a secret passageway led to a hidden exit. Bumpy's heart pounded in his chest as they moved through the narrow passage. He could feel the weight of the entire city bearing down on him. As Bumpy emerged from the back exit, he could finally breathe a little easier. They were not safe yet, but they had bought themselves a little time. The next few days were a blur of constant motion. Bumpy and Frank went underground, hiding in safe houses across the city, while Bumpy's loyal men kept watch on the streets, ensuring the feds couldn't trace their steps. It wasn't long before Bumpy's escape became a city-wide legend. The news outlets across New York reported the failed raid, the feds' embarrassment, and the fact that Bumpy Johnson had once again outwitted them. For the authorities, it was a humiliation. For Bumpy, it was just another day in the life. He had been underestimated once again, and as always, he had used it to his advantage. The city of New York and the law that had once sought to break him now knew that Bumpy Johnson could not be stopped. But the danger wasn't over. Bumpy knew that his enemies, both the law and rival criminals, would come for him again. But as the days went on, Bumpy's position in Harlem grew stronger. The people had seen what he could do. He had faced the law, outwitted them, and kept Harlem safe. It only solidified his legendary status as the protector of the community.